Welcome back to the Epic Universal Podcast. I'm entertainer writer Jim Hill, and this is the podcast where we cover the latest Universal news, rumors, and history. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Eric Hersey. And you just got back from a short weekend trip to Hershey, Pennsylvania, right?
That, in fact, we did, Jim. And I mean, I always feel pretty close to Hershey, considering my entire life that has been incorrectly pronounced my last name. But this was a what I call a nice research trip. So we actually went to Hershey Park, which is a local amusement park for those who haven't been. And it just so happens they were holding an event there. It's Halloween time called Dark Nights.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that's their version of like a Halloween Horror Nights event, right?
Right. So at 6 p.m., they basically get several sections of the park and they mark them as scare zones. And they had, 4 or 5 maybe haunted houses you could enter. So this, I thought, would be a great sampler for what I would say is Halloween Horror Nights.
Okay, so I gotta ask, what did you and the family think?
Well, let's just put it this way, Jim. It's going to be a few more years before the entire family and I can experience a Halloween Horror Nights. 2 of the 3 kids were kind of mortified and terrified to go anywhere near a scare zone, let alone wait 60 minutes through a haunted house. So, needless to say, I'm kind of happy that I learned we're not quite ready for Halloween Horror Nights. We learned it in Hershey, which was only 4-hour drive, and it was already part of the tickets, as opposed to me traveling all the way to Orlando to find out that my kids won't go near. So I think it's going to be a few minutes before I get to try out the Halloween Horror Nights.
That's probably likely. And speaking of Orlando, let's take a moment here to thank our sponsor, which of course is touringplans.com. And whether you're planning a trip to the Universal Orlando Resort or Walt Disney World, Touring Plan has crowd calendars, ride strategies, and tips to help you save time and money. So you're planning a trip, head on over to touringplans.com to get started with your planning. So, okay, so now we get to the news portion of the show. And first item here on the pile, Eric, kind of a sad, but nice that they did this tribute. Do you want to talk about what the fans did for Dame Maggie Smith at the parks?
Yeah, well, Maggie Smith just passed away, on the 27th, I believe, peacefully. And we all know her from the Harry Potter series. And of course, since she was part of the Harry Potter series, it seemed like all the fans and so forth organized a wand ceremony over at Hogsmeade. So they just a nice little tribute to Maggie Smith, who I mean, truthfully, she's done a lot. She was Elizabeth II actually gave her the Dame title, I believe. So she's done quite a lot in the movies over the years. So I thought this was a nice little fitting ending or tribute to her, and I thought it was worth noting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just what's interesting if you know the Harry Potter films, and again, I know you did your due diligence before you and the family went down for your trip. So I want to say it's in Half-Blood Prince, where it's actually the character that Maggie Smith played in that film, Professor McGonagall, who, when they lose Dumbledore after he tumbles out of the astronomer's tower, that she lifts her wand aloft, and then you basically see everybody on the Hogwarts campus doing the same thing.
Right.
So it in a weird sort of way, it's a very fitting tribute. But let's see, beyond that, I was actually kind of intrigued about this next thing that you found, which is going to be held at New York Comic Con later this month, right?
Well, yeah, Jim. So I'm not super familiar. I mean, I'm just as most people, the San Diego Comic Con, and I know there's multiple Comic Cons. We have one here near Pittsburgh and so forth. But the New York Comic Con will host a Universal Epic Universe panel October 17th. So there's not much more said than we know that. But this could get it. I mean, I was going to ask you, Jim, New York Comic Con, is it a big thing? I mean, it's not San Diego, but is it something more so than just our little Pittsburgh Steel City Con?
Okay, it's in the Javits Center, which of course is right down by the Hudson River. In fact, that's the thing about the Javits is when Hurricane Sandy happened like a decade ago, and there was a tremendous storm surge mean, to this day, you walk through the Javits and go, "Okay, all right, I can still smell the hurricane." But yeah, it's 3 days long. Has some amazing panels and presentations. I mean, Nancy and I used to go down every year, and in fact, we'd meet the Disney reps there and do all sorts of on-site interviews and that sort of thing. We haven't been in a while. I think the last time we went, we took my niece Chloe, who had a wonderful time and has been pestering me since about, "We're going. We're going to go again."
Well, Jim, do you think we're going to get any news? Like that's my thing is like they're having this panel. I don't recall. It's not like they have a D23 where they make announcements and stuff. So at Comic Cons is likely going to be places where there could be news. What do you anticipate? Is this just a
Oh,
hype piece? Could we find out an opening date, or is that not likely?
oh, that's interesting. Because again, remember, we've been hearing some intriguing things about what may open when, and that's a great question. I'm
Well,
now
we're gonna have to circle it on our calendar,
yeah,
right?
I'm now thinking I may have to drive down to Manhattan on October 17th.
just
So
just give you somewhere to go.
okay, we were just talking about Harry Potter related stuff, and you dug up something. Well, again, we talked on previous shows about that event that Universal Studios Hollywood is going to be doing, that hard ticket next year, the
Right.
Fan Fest nights, and
Well, it makes me,
mm,
yeah. I mean, it's exciting already
mm,
because it has the Star Trek, it has Dungeons and Dragons
mm.
and so forth, and what now they're adding Harry Potter experience to it. So I have not yet. This is on our list. We have not done the Fantastic Beasts yet. Nifflers. Are you familiar with
I
Nifflers?
I am, yeah, that they are. Newt Scamander has some problems with the Niffler in the first film, and what's kind of interesting about this is the creatures that they're going to be including as part of this Harry Potter thing. In fact, what's kind of interesting is the imagery that's out there is from Universal Studios Japan. They actually introduced these creatures at that park's version of the Wizarding World in Hogsmeade Village. So, what's kind of interesting is that these creations that, you know, again, that were built for the Japan park are coming to Hollywood for this hard ticket, and going to be interesting to see as a trial balloon. Face it, we've already been told that the Ministry of Magic land in Epic Universe will have some of these creatures. But interesting that the first stateside park where we'll potentially get to experience this is Hollywood.
Right. I'm sure that they'll get them all excited. So that way the merch is already there.
Mhm.
So Epic Universe is already ready to sell some Niffler merch, I'm sure, like plushies and so forth.
So we'll see.
Hey, and this other piece, Jim, is just something I thought was really interesting, especially because I think maybe our good buddy Jim Shul might even be featured in it. It's the making of the Villain Con
Mhm.
Minion Blast. There's a 11-minute film that's on
Yeah.
Peacock, and I just learned about this, so I
Mhm.
will add this to my
Yes.
queue for later tonight. But have you got to catch this, or is this the first time you're hearing as
I
well?
have not. In fact, that's one of the lights of doing this show is that there's lots of stuff I don't know about. And thank you for digging this up. As soon as we finish here myself, I'm going to head on over there.
All right. Well, we'll compare notes, and if we see, we'll send a message over to Shul if we see some of his artwork.
There we go. There we go. Okay, couple other things here before we complete the news segment here, folks. On the last show, Eric and I were talking about the initial box office projections for the Wild Robot and how evidently Universal had put out, "Yeah, we're going to do 20 million domestic," and I literally on that show I think they're lowballing.
Right.
In fact, what I had heard is that they're anticipating 30 to 35. Well, as it turns out, yes, that's exactly what this DreamWorks animation film did over its opening weekend. 35 million domestic, an additional 18 million overseas. Opening weekend box office of 56 million. By the way, just checked over at Box Office Mojo and continuing to chug along, doing very well. Also, other news coming out of Universal Pictures this past Sunday, September 29th, production wrapped on Jurassic World Rebirth. And this is, yeah, again, I guess the fourth film in the series.
Sure. Who's counting?
Yep. And started shooting in Thailand back on June 13th of this year. By the way, directed by Gareth Edwards, who has directed my favorite of the Disney Star Wars films, Rogue One. And that's going to arrive in theaters on July 2nd of next year. We just learned that John M. Chu, the gentleman who's directing the Wicked films for Universal, has lined up his next project. Also going to be for Universal, and it's a movie version of Britney Spears' best-selling memoir, "The Woman in Me," and
All right. I think Lauren has actually listened to that on audiobook, so I'll ask her.
okay.
I mean, are we thinking Brittany's going to be the lead in this? Is she going to dust off her old acting chops?
Well, what I'm hearing is that did you ever get to see what was it, Rocket Man from 2019 or
Yeah. Yep.
Bohemian Rhapsody?
Both.
Two-
Yes.
Okay, so the notion is this is a movie very much in that style, in
Okay.
that it will be a biopic with their song catalog.
Oh, okay.
So, and one other note, Universal seems to be getting serious about its Creature from the Black Lagoon reboot. By the way, Eric, they've been talking about this since the 1980s. In fact, at one point, John Landis of American Werewolf in London was
Hmm.
supposed to direct this thing. But James Wan, who directed Aquaman from 2018, and then its sequel, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, went out last year. So this is a guy who's familiar filming things underwater. So he's supposed to direct. And Sean Tretta, who actually did the Star Trek Picard show for Paramount Plus, is supposed to write the screenplay. And what's especially interesting about this, Eric, is that there is an expansion pad
Mm.
inside of Dark Universe over at Epic Universe that has already supposedly been set aside for a Creature from the Black Lagoon attraction. So, with this film now seriously in the works, I can't help but think this is going to be these two projects are going to be interlinked.
And it's not going to be a musical. It's not going to be
Well,
the
yeah,
lovely
that
musical you turned us on to several episodes back. But
Oh,
no.
by the way, that there is an amazing head over to YouTube. Now, mind you, you need like 2-3 hours to watch all of this, but gentleman has done an interview with members of the cast, and the behind the scenes stories are so amazing and so horrifying. You know,
All
you
right.
you got to listen to them at some point. All right, final note here. We were just talking about theme park expansion plans last month. On September 18th, there was a ribbon cutting on the lower lot at One Universal, which is the brand new creative campus that's been built out in Hollywood. This consists of a 350,000 square foot office building, an 84,000 square foot commons building, and then a patio of 10,000 feet worth of green space. And I'm just going to say this, put this out there. Universal Studios Hollywood has very, very ambitious plans after Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift, that new coaster that's being constructed right now, opens in 2026. And by moving all of the studio's administrative stuff into this brand new office building, Eric, that opens up quite a bit of real estate. So, going to be interesting to see what happens at that point.
That seems to, literally, Jim. I mean, as more and more we talk about Hollywood, it
Mhm.
becomes a checklist item on my list to say, all right, we need to make that happen. So,
Okay. Yes, so you and I need to get out there and do that trip. And but the other thing we need to do is we need to pause now for an ad. So apologies, folks. We'll be back with the show in a moment. But first, this. And we're back. Okay, so on last week's show, Eric, we mentioned that we were going to talk about Alfred Hitchcock in the park on this edition of the Epic Universal podcast, but we had a slight change of plans, right?
right, Jim. I mean, it's going to be October all month long, right? So we can
Hmm.
talk about scary stuff, but we actually we were ready, prepped, ready to go. But then we received a question on Facebook from
Hmm.
Scott. So what I do is I send these questions over to you, and I think you had a bit of a good answer. But let's hear the question.
All right. Scott Myers wrote in via Facebook to say, in the last episode, which was really interesting with behind the scenes stuff I had never heard before, Jim shared the story of how the Looney Tune characters almost made it into Universal Florida's second gate. One question I had was if there was ever any concern from Universal about the fact that these same characters had long been featured in the Six Flags parks. And I wondered if Jim knew anything about whether the Universal deal would have been exclusive, because I can't imagine Universal paying that much for characters that they would have had to share with Six Flags. And he goes on to say, great work with the podcast, and mentioning like Eric, I too am a dedicated Disney park traveler who hasn't been to Universal Florida since 1990, but your excitement about the experience has me reconsidering, and can't wait to hear what you and Jim have next. So thank you, Scott. That was very sweet. Okay, so Scott, following up on your question, I've done some drilling down into this tale and actually has some really interesting Disney related links. Okay, so picture this. On the heels of all the press and acclaim that Disney World received when it first opened in October of 1971, in January of 1972, the Marriott Corporation announced that it would be expanding into the theme park business with not, oh, by the way, Eric, not with one theme park, three. All right, so
Going all in right off the get-go.
No, that's it exactly.
Why even deal with one? Let's do three. Cool.
Okay, so but it's three theme parks, all with the same name, Great America, and one is to be built in Prince William County, Virginia, and I know that name's going to be very familiar to you, Eric. Okay, one's outside of Chicago in Gurnee, Illinois, and the other one would be built in Northern California in Santa Clara. And the idea was that Marriott would have all three of these parks up and running just prior to the start of the American Bicentennial in the summer of 1976. Now, now picture this. You're a chief executive of the Walt Disney Company. All right. And you've just opened Walt Disney World. And again, remember, this is the project that was originally supposed to cost $100 million, and you're looking at $400 million. You've spent all this money. But now, just 9 months after Marriott announces that they're entering the theme park business. So this is September now of 1972. Mattel announces that they're going to get in the theme park business. Not only that, they're going to build Circus World just 10 miles down the road from Walt Disney World.
Right. So everybody sees this and they're jumping in.
No, that's it exactly. And the worst part, SeaWorld has already jumped in. All right. They're already building on their site off of I-4. In fact, that would open in December of 1973. And so you've got all of these deep-pocketed people suddenly on Mickey's turf. And so what does Disney do? October of 1972, they announced, it's like, okay, you're going to F with us? We're going to F with you. They announced $50 million expansion to Walt Disney World. We're $400 million in the hole. Let's throw another 50 in. And this is when they're going to do Space Mountain. They're going to do Pirates. They're going to expand for Wilderness, and a whole bunch of new campsites. And you're going to get things like the Hoop-de-Doo and all that. But anyway, circle back to the Marriott stuff now. The park in Virginia doesn't happen for much the same reason that Disney's America doesn't happen. In 1994, they get a lot of pushback from locals. But the Chicago Great America and the Northern California Great America, they actually opened within 2 months of one another, Eric, in the late spring, early summer of 1976. And because Marriott knew that their park would be compared to Disney, they reach out to Warner Brothers in 1973 and secure the theme park rights to the Looney Tune characters. Now, where this story gets interesting is by the early 1980s, executives at Marriott have now decided, the company's theme parks are just not turning a big enough profit. So it's like, all right, let's sell these properties off. So Northern California Park, Great America, actually gets sold off to the city of Santa Clara in February of '84. The city wanted the land so they could then control its development. Whereas Great America outside of Chicago, it gets sold to Six Flags in May of that same year, 1984. And because Great America had the theme park rights to the Looney Tunes characters, now the Six Flag Corporation owns that property in Gurnee, Illinois. So Six Flags is now the proud owners of the theme park rights to the Looney Tune characters, which they can now put out into their six other Six Flags parks
Wow.
around the
Listen,
country.
applaud the attorney who wrote that up.
Well, in fact, what this reminds me of is when Disney bought ABC Cap Cities in 1995, and actually the hidden gem in the pile there was ESPN. That was the thing that the mouse made the most money off of out of the acquisition. I mean, for the first 2 decades or so. So think about it. Six Flags goes into this deal with Great America, or the Marriott people say, all right, well, we get a park in outside of Chicago. That's good for us. But and so we get to expand our portfolio, but only to then discover, as part of the deal, they get the theme park rights to the Looney Tunes characters, which they can now take to all of their parks. So it's double prizes.
Right, Jim, and I'll tell you what, I actually have been to that Six Flags in Chicago, and when
Oh,
we were talking about,
mhm.
meeting the characters, I have pictures with Sylvester and Daffy and all that, and I was thinking to myself, "Man, that I just assumed Six Flags always had the rights, and this is darn interesting how they actually acquired that."
And just another weird little bend on this story. Again, we're talking about this deal goes down in 1984. And of course, 1984 is the year that Michael Eisner comes to power at Disney. And one of the very first things that Michael did is he was looking at the flagging attendants for Epcot, and it's like, put the characters in there. So, what was fascinating is you had these two giant companies effectively turning to sets of characters to try to lure customers through the door. All right. Anyway, we jump ahead now to 1991. This is when Time Warner actually buys the Six Flags chain. And remember, Time Warner is the company that leased the rights
Right.
to Marriott back in the day. And those folks then lean really, really heavily into putting attractions in these theme parks that are based on IPs that they own. Not just Looney Tunes, but Batman, Superman, the Joker. You get the idea. Now, to circle back to what Scott had been asking about Cartoon World, the idea was for that theme park's Looney Tune Land section was that it was going to use aspects of this IP that Six Flags previously hadn't, with attractions of size like Acme University, Coyote Canyon, and the Marvin the Martian experience. And again, what's kind of interesting about this is, remember, the Steven Spielberg Presents Tiny Toon show had only debuted in syndication in September of 1990. And again, the irony there is that Spielberg decided to get into the afternoon kid show syndication market because DuckTales, Disney had started doing that
Right.
just 3 years previous, in September of '87. And by the way, same rules would have applied in regards to Superman and Batman, whereas Six Flag would have a Superman like a free fall attraction or a Joker themed coaster. What they were going to do at Cartoon World is you were going to be able to walk the streets of Metropolis. You were going to be able to go walk down Crime Alley at Gotham City. It was so much bigger, so much more ambitious. I mean, we were just talking on the last show about Popeye and Pluto's Bill Drive Barges or Dudley Do Right Ripsaw Falls. I mean, those were the sorts of attractions with full lands that supported them. But anyway, of course, irony here is just a few years after the Universal deal with Warner Brothers to acquire the theme park rights for all of those characters in perpetuity for just 40 million. That falls through. Um, what does Time Warner do? It turns around and sells off the Six Flag chain to Premier Parks in 1998. And since Universal Islands Adventure wasn't supposed until May of the following year, '99, it's likely if they had just stayed the course, Universal would have wound up with an exclusive to the theme park rights to all of these characters.
Oh man, think of that. Think of the what if timeline there. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Scott, for sending in that question. I mean, again, I apologize to the Alfred Hitchcock fans out there, but this seemed like a fun idea to pursue, but thanks to our listeners. And speaking of our listeners, we need your help because we have a universal and characters related question to put out to you. Okay, to explain, this past weekend over on Disney Unpacked, Jim Schul and I did the story of how the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had a meet and greet experience on New York Street at Disney MGM. This was from July of 1990 through June of 1995. And uh, Disney reportedly got the theme park rights to these characters with the help of Jim Henson, who, by the way, his Creature Shop, the arm of the Henson Company that did effects work, built the animatronic suits for the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie, which came out in March of 1990. But here's the thing. There's an image out there of performers in what appear to be legitimate Ninja Turtle outfits, and they're performing. Well, I mean, Eric, they're playing guitars, right? Is that
Like
what
with
this
their two
picture?
big fingers. Yeah, right.
Okay, all right, but they appear to be performing inside of the old Miami Vice Action Spectacular Stunt Show Theater at Universal Studios Hollywood. In fact, on the hillside behind them, there's like this line of Universal employees
Right.
all wearing Universal t-shirts with the logo on it. And this image has a Getty watermark on it, so that means it's legit. And it has a date of June of 1989. So it's a full year before the Ninja Turtles show up at Disney MGM. So a full year before, these characters are performing at Universal Studios Hollywood. Um, but wait, it gets better. Friend of the show, BioReconstruct, sent me a note just in the past couple of days, recalling that for a time at that theme park, again, Universal Studios Hollywood supposedly had a Ninja Turtles meet and greet where you actually got to go and get your picture taken and get an autograph with the turtles down in the sewers. Um, and again, I've never heard anything about this. And now, mind you, it kind of lines up. The original Ninja Turtle comics came out in '84, and by 1987, the Playmate toy line had launched, and the animated series had been was being used to help promote that toy line. So, Eric, what do you think? Could this Universal Studios Hollywood thing in '89 could that have been tied to the animated series?
Well, Jim, I'm looking here. I mean, and certainly I had toys. Believe me, I was part of the
Okay.
craze there. I mean, I have
Mhm,
multiple T-shirts, all that.
mhm,
It there's not really much to say that it's from the animated. I mean, they got the right colors.
mhm.
It very well could be, but then you also look at like the movie, and it's very closely resemble. It's tough to say. I think
Yeah.
we need like a Sherlock Holmes to tell us.
No, no,
Somebody
no.
that's been there.
I am hoping, just like BioReconstruct, that one of our listeners out there was at the park. Again, this is Universal Studios Hollywood, summer of '89. That they either got to see the show or got to experience his meet and greet, and we would love to have you tell us where it was presented in the park. I mean, I think Bio insinuates that in the parking structure that they built into the hillside, the one that's got the floors that are Frankenstein and that sort of thing. That he remembers it being somewhere in that area.
You know, I wish at this point in time, Jim, I wish I would have like a catalog of all their episodes and see which episode they went as a touring band. Because if it wasn't a cartoon, then we would know the answer right now. And if it's, we can line up the guitars and the keyboard guitar, the keytar. But yeah, I think we're going to rely on you guys, the
Okay,
people out
well,
there,
all
letting
right.
us know what the heck's going on here. And this has been quite fascinating, Jim, because if you think about it, they're at Disney, not very
Mhm.
long from here, right? And
Oh no, no, yeah, yeah.
so I'm glad you guys uncovered that, and I think it's a perfect opportunity for us to find out some unsolved Universal Studios history.
Okay. Again, just if you could help us out here, folks, that would really be sweet. Oh, and speaking of sweet, since you just got back from the sweetest place on earth, which of course is Hershey, Pennsylvania, by the way, did you get to see the light poles with the Hershey Kiss?
Absolutely, Jim.
Okay.
We were there. Listen, everything there. I will tell you my favorite part, though, real
Mhm.
quick, is that we stayed at the Hershey Lodge, and
Mhm.
we always look for the information channels, and
Mhm.
we found a channel that did nothing but play a 45-minute loop of the life and times of Milton S. Hershey. He is fascinating. If you guys
Oh.
listen, he created
Mhm.
a prototype city.
Mhm.
Hershey is made because of the factory. Look that man up. I watched this over and over. Uh, and now I have a new fascination with just him in general, but
Wow.
loved in general. But I think, Jim,
Mhm.
um, I think there's some ties here. We went obviously to Chocolate World, and we went through the
Mhm. Mhm.
tour, which does remind you of kind of 80s Epcot, and
Mhm.
so forth. But we also went to a place called the Chocolatier, which is a restaurant with
Oh.
all things infused chocolate. What
Mhm.
does that remind you of, Jim? Any
I
universal ties?
a certain Toothsome's Chocolate Emporium. So,
Right.
oh,
What do
wow.
you say next week we kind of talk a little bit more about chocolate? I mean, it is October. We have to
Mhm.
get gear up for all the chocolate that the kids are going to be getting at the end of the month anyway, right?
This is true. This is true. And again, since it's October all month long, we can still talk about Hitchcock in a week or two. So, all right. So until then, though, Eric, and if anyone wants to get a hold of you, especially if they have any information about this Universal Studios Hollywood Ninja Turtle thing, where can our listeners find you?
You can reach me at Eric Hersey on Instagram or X. Jim, how about you?
Well, let's see. You can find me on X and Instagram as Jim Hill Media, and then over on Facebook at Jim Hill Media News. And all right, I guess that's going to wrap things up for today, folks. So, on behalf of Mr. Hersey, thank you for listening, and stick around to find out what's coming this month over on the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network. Thanks for listening to today's episode. And if you like what you heard, head on over to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. This really helps get the word out about our shows. We also have some other shows on the network that you might like. Each week, we drop a brand new Disney dish with Len Testa. For animation and movie news, please listen to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor. By the way, you can also check out Drew's other podcasts, like The Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, which he does with Charles Hood. For all things Lucasfilm, why don't you subscribe to Looking at Lucasfilm with Brian Gahn? Likewise, we have I Want That Too with the lovely Lauren Hersey, our weekly podcast that features the latest merch and the stories behind that merch. And our epic Universal podcast takes a look at the Universal theme park. So please join Eric Hersey and I on that weekly. If you enjoy theme park history, we also host Manufacturing the Magic with Shelley and Noah Valladolid. That podcast tells the story of how we got the modern theme parks that we enjoy today. Join myself, Len Testa, and veteran Imagineer Jim Schul for our latest season of Disney Unpacked, our first ever video series exclusively for Patreon. These get released first Sunday of every month, and each month we release several exclusive podcasts to help support this video series. I want to thank everyone that supports the Jim Hill Media Network. For more information about podcasts and content, head on over to jimhillmedia.com. So that's going to do it for now, folks. Thanks again for listening, and we will catch up on the next show.